The first thing Agnes noticed was the smell. It wasn't the familiar scent of lemon polish or the faint, comforting hint of baked bread from her own kitchen. This was sharp, clinical, disinfectant. It stung her nose just a little, a cold, unwelcoming smell that promised cleanliness but offered no warmth. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor the quiet strength within us all. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from you. She sat in a chair that felt too stiff, covered in a vinyl that stuck slightly to the back of her legs. Around her, the room was painted a pale, forgettable beige. There was a bed, neatly made with tight corners, a dresser she didn't recognize, and a window that showed nothing but a patch of gray sky above a vast, empty parking lot. No trees rustling, no glimpse of her neighbor Martha's prize-winning rose bushes. Just asphalt and distant cars. David and Bethany stood near the doorway, looking like they were dressed for church, but felt more like they were waiting for a train that was running late. David kept shifting his weight, and Bethany smoothed her skirt, even though it wasn't wrinkled. They had that bright, strained look on their faces, the one people wear when they're trying very hard to convince you, and maybe themselves, that everything is perfectly fine. "See, Mom? Isn't it nice?" David said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "It's got everything you'll need." Bethany stepped in, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's for your own good, Agnes. Really. Just a little extra support, to make things easier." The word felt like a stone dropping in Agnes's stomach. Easier for who? "With the baby coming, you know," David added quickly, as if that explained everything. "We need the space, and you won't have to worry about the house anymore. No more stairs, no more yard work. It's perfect. Just less burden, less burden." That word hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Agnes didn't speak. She didn't argue. She didn't even let her eyes well up, though her throat felt thick and tight. She just sat there, her hands clasped in her lap, her knuckles white. Her posture was straight, the way her mother had taught her a lady always sat, no matter what. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind. Disbelief warred with a deep, piercing hurt. How could they? Without even asking? She nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She looked at her son, the boy she'd poured her entire life into, the one who used to hold her hand so tightly crossing the street. He couldn't meet her gaze now. Bethany was already glancing at her watch. "Well," David said, clearly eager to go, "we should probably get going. Got a lot to do." "The staff here are lovely," Bethany chirped, gesturing vaguely. "They'll take good care of you." They hugged her quickly, almost awkwardly. David's hug was brief, a pat on her shoulder. Bethany's was a light squeeze, her cheek brushing Agnes's for just a second. They smelled faintly of a life happening somewhere else. "We'll visit soon, Mom," David promised, already backing toward the door. "Yes, soon," echoed Bethany. Then they were gone. The door didn't slam, but it closed with a soft final click that sounded louder than thunder in the sudden silence. Agnes was alone in a beige room that smelled of chemicals, in a stiff chair with a view of a parking lot. Her hands were still clasped in her lap. She wasn't in her home. Her independence, hard-won and fiercely protected, felt suddenly fragile, placed somewhere she didn't belong, by the people she loved most. Sitting in that quiet beige room, the memory of David and Bethany leaving felt sharp, like a paper cut you didn't see coming. It made Agnes think back, not just to that day, but to the slow slide of things over the past few years. It wasn't a sudden drop, more like walking down a gentle slope you didn't realize was getting steeper until you stumbled. Their visits had started getting shorter. Sundays used to be a regular thing. Dinner at her place, maybe helping her with a small fix-it job, just talking. But gradually, Sundays turned into hurried afternoon stops, then just calls. And the calls, they changed too. They weren't long chats about their days, or David asking her advice like he used to. They became quick check-ins, "Just calling to make sure you're okay, Mom," or "Need anything from the store?" Practical things. Necessary, maybe, but they lacked the comfortable rambling of shared lives. It was like they were ticking a box. Bethany, especially, seemed to find fault in little things. She'd walk into Agnes's cozy living room, the one with the slightly faded floral couch David used to curl up on as a boy, and her eyes would dart around. "Oh, Agnes, you still have that old television." Or, looking at the wooden trim around the windows that David had helped her paint years ago, she'd say, "This house has such vintage charm, doesn't it?" Vintage charm, delivered with a tight little smile that didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like she was pointing out flaws. Agnes tried to brush it off. People get busy. Lives change. David had a demanding job, and Bethany had her own interests, her own way of doing things. It was natural, she told herself. They were building their own life. She didn't want to be a complaining mother, clinging to the past. She wanted to be understanding. She loved David so much, and she wanted to love Bethany too. She made excuses for them in her head, weaving explanations like patches on a well-worn quilt. They meant well, it was just their way. But the little comments, the subtle criticisms, started to feel less like innocent observations and more like something else, like they were trying to make her see the house the way they saw it, not as a warm, lived-in home, but as old, outdated, maybe even a problem. The first real crack in her comforting narrative happened on a surprisingly warm afternoon in early spring. David and Bethany had stopped by unannounced, which was unusual. They came in, looking a bit flustered. David had a folder under his arm. They sat at the kitchen table, accepting the iced tea Agnes offered, but seeming distracted. They were talking about needing more space, about their plans for the future, about potentially starting a family. It was all pleasant enough, but there was an underlying edge to their voices, a sort of nervous energy. Agnes listened, happy they were sharing their dreams with her, even if the conversation felt a little rushed. When they left, just as quickly as they arrived, David accidentally knocked the folder off the table. Papers scattered. While he quickly gathered them up, a single sheet fluttered near Agnes's feet. It was a printout from a website, maybe a real estate site. Her house wasn't pictured, but the address was there, clear as day. And next to it, some numbers, an appraisal, and a note scribbled in the margin, in what looked like David's handwriting. Potential redevelopment, check zoning. Agnes's heart gave a funny little lurch. Potential redevelopment ? They were looking into the value of her house, not because they were curious, but because they were considering, what, selling it, tearing it down. The thought was like a cold stone in her gut. She handed the paper back to David, forcing a small smile. "Looks like you dropped this," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. David snatched it back, his face flushing just a little. "Oh, thanks, Mom. Just stuff for work." He avoided her eyes. That was it. No explanation, no shared thought, just a quick denial and a change of subject. He stuffed the paper back into the folder like it was something he didn't want her to see. In that moment, Agnes knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that their talk about needing space wasn't just about their future. It was about her space, and the thought of her home, her sanctuary, being reduced to numbers on a page, to potential redevelopment, planted a seed of doubt that no amount of rationalization could entirely weed out. Something was shifting, and it felt less like growth and more like being slowly, subtly pushed aside. After finding that paper, with the house value and the word redevelopment, a knot of worry had tightened in Agnes's stomach. But she pushed it down. She still told herself she was overthinking, that David was just being thorough, practical. So, when David invited her to a dinner party Bethany was hosting for some of their friends, Agnes decided to make an extra effort. This was a chance to connect, to step into their world and remind them she was still very much a part of things. It wasn't at her house, but at their newer, modern place in the suburbs. Agnes spent the afternoon getting ready. She chose her nicest dress, a soft navy blue that David had complimented years ago. She even went to the salon for a simple wash and set, just to feel a little polished, a little less like the woman who spent her days gardening and patching things around the house. She wanted to look presentable, to fit in. She also baked her famous apple pie, the one with the flaky crust that had won ribbons at the county fair. A little taste of home, she thought, for David, and a warm gesture for Bethany's friends. When she arrived, the house was bright and airy, full of sleek furniture and art she didn't quite understand. Bethany greeted her at the door, looking elegant in a flowy dress. "Agnes, you made it," she said, her smile wide but somehow distant. She took the pie from Agnes. "Oh, pie, how traditional." The comment hung in the air for a second before Bethany turned to lead her inside. The living room was already filled with people, mostly couples, all roughly David and Bethany's age. They were all dressed nicely, talking in animated groups, holding wine glasses. Agnes felt a little ripple of nervousness, like being the new kid at school. She smiled, trying to look friendly and approachable. David came over and gave her a quick hug. "Hey, Mom, glad you could come. Grab a drink, make yourself at home." He gestured vaguely towards the kitchen island, where bottles were set out, then was quickly drawn into a conversation by a man in a sharp suit. Agnes found a quiet corner, balancing her small clutch purse. She watched the groups talking, listening to snippets of conversation about jobs, travel, and renovations. It all sounded very fast-paced and different from her life. She felt a little out of place, like a paperback book left on a shelf of e-readers. She tried to join a group talking about local restaurants. "Oh, if you like Italian," Agnes offered. "There's a wonderful little place downtown, Luigi's. Been there for 30 years, family run, just excellent pasta." The woman she spoke to nodded politely, but her eyes had already flicked away, back to the person she'd been talking to. "Anyway," the woman continued, picking up her previous thread, "we just tried that new fusion place. The plate, absolutely divine small plates." Agnes's comment about Luigi's seemed to evaporate into the air. She tried again later, when the conversation drifted to hobbies. "I spend a lot of time in my garden," Agnes said to a woman standing nearby. "It's amazing what you can grow with just a little care. This year my tomatoes." The woman smiled. "Oh, how lovely. My trainer says gardening is excellent for core strength. Are you doing any Pilates?" Agnes felt a familiar, quiet ache. It wasn't deliberate rudeness, not exactly. But it was a kind of polite dismissal, a gentle stepping around her attempts to connect, as if her contributions weren't quite relevant to their conversation. She felt herself shrinking, her voice getting a little softer each time she tried. Dinner was served at a long modern dining table. Agnes was seated near the end, a little away from the center of the lively conversation. She ate her food, which was fancy but not very filling, and listened. They talked about real estate, about investments, about the best schools for future children. It felt less like a friendly dinner party and more like a business meeting. Then someone mentioned family histories, sharing funny stories from their childhoods. Agnes saw her chance. She reached into her bag, where she'd tucked a small photo album, a collection of old pictures, mostly of David as a boy, scraped knees, school plays, birthday parties. She thought it might bring a little warmth, a shared memory. "Oh, I have some old photos," she said, her voice a little hesitant now. She opened the album to a page showing David, maybe 7 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up a drawing. "Look, David, do you remember this? You drew this picture of our house, said it was a castle." She slid the album across the table toward him. David glanced at it, a brief, almost performative smile touching his lips. "Huh. Yeah. Wow, Mom. You still have all this stuff," he said, pushing the album back towards her without really looking at it. Then Bethany laughed, a sharp, bright sound that drew everyone's attention. "Oh my gosh," she said, looking pointedly at Agnes. "An actual photo album? Agnes, that is just precious. So delightfully retro." A few people at the table chuckled politely. One of Bethany's friends leaned in. "My mother-in-law still uses dial-up internet," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "It's like living in a time capsule." Agnes felt her face grow warm. Precious, delightfully retro. Time capsule. The words landed like small, sharp stones. They weren't talking about the album or the drawing. They were talking about her life, her memories, her home, reduced to something quaint, outdated, almost a joke. She gripped the edge of the table under her napkin. She looked at David, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of defense. But he was already looking away, engaged in a quick, low-voiced conversation with the man next to him, a slight, uncomfortable smile on his face. He didn't defend her. He didn't even acknowledge her hurt. He just let it hang there. "I just thought you might enjoy seeing them," Agnes said quietly, closing the album and placing it back in her bag. She felt a profound sense of isolation, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. The food in her mouth tasted like ash. The rest of the evening was a blur. Agnes nodded when expected, offered small, careful smiles, but inside, she was pulling back, building walls. The lively conversation flowed around her like a river, and she was standing on the bank, watching it pass by, separate and unseen. When it was finally time to leave, David offered to call her a cab. As she waited outside on their pristine, empty driveway, the cool night air felt like a relief against her flushed cheeks. In the quiet of the taxi ride home, staring out at the unfamiliar streetlights blurring past, the full weight of the evening settled on her. It wasn't just a bad night, it was a revelation. They didn't see her, not the real her, the woman who had built a life with her own hands, who had loved fiercely, who had sacrificed everything. They saw an aging woman, out of touch, living in a house they saw only for its potential value. She wasn't a cherished member of the family. She was a relic, an inconvenience, someone to be politely tolerated, maybe even managed. The painful truth settled deep in her bones. She was being edited out of the picture, piece by painful piece, and the realization hurt more than any sharp word or dismissive glance. It felt like being erased. After that dinner party, the feeling of being edited out stayed with Agnes like a chill that wouldn't leave, no matter how high she turned the thermostat. The little moments of being overlooked, Bethany's sharp, retro comment, David's silence, it all added up. It was like they were already talking about her in the past tense, or as a problem to be solved. A couple of weeks later, David called. His voice was lighter than usual, almost too light. "Hey, Mom, how about we come over Saturday, just for a little chat? Nothing heavy, okay? Just wanted to check in." A little chat, nothing heavy. Agnes felt a prickle of suspicion. David didn't usually announce his visits with such careful, cheerful words, unless he was bracing himself for something. But she agreed. "Okay, dear, Saturday it is." She spent the morning cleaning, fussing over the house more than usual, not because she expected them to notice, but because she needed it to feel like her home, solid and real, especially with that unsettling feeling still lingering. She even put out the good teacups, just in case Bethany decided to have tea for once. They arrived right on time, which was another sign something was off. David was carrying a thin folder, and neither of them took off their coats, even though it wasn't particularly cold in the house. They stood awkwardly in the living room, the afternoon sun falling on the worn spot on the rug where David used to play with his trucks. Have a seat, Agnes said, gesturing to the couch. She sat in her armchair across from them, her hands folded. "Ready." David cleared his throat. Bethany stood stiffly near the fireplace, arms crossed, looking around the room with that same appraising, slightly critical gaze. "So," David began, not meeting her eyes directly. "We wanted to talk about what's best." Agnes waited. "Best? That word again. With the baby coming, Bethany picked up, her voice smooth. Our needs are changing, and we've been thinking about your needs, Agnes. Your safety, mostly. David jumped in. The stairs, the upkeep. It's a lot for one person. Agnes looked around the room. Her room. The room where she'd nursed David through chicken pox, where they'd decorated the Christmas tree every year, where she'd sat up late, patching his Boy Scout uniform. The walls held 1,000 silent stories. A lot for one person. She'd managed it for decades, alone. We found a place, Bethany continued, stepping closer, her voice softening slightly, like she was delivering bad news wrapped in cotton wool. A lovely community. It's called Meadowbrook Gardens. It's not a nursing home, Agnes. It's assisted living. It's very modern, clean. They have activities, support. Agnes felt a cold wave wash over her. Meadowbrook Gardens, assisted living. The euphemisms were polite, but the meaning was brutally clear. They were putting her away, without a real conversation, without asking what she wanted. Support? Agnes finally spoke, her voice quiet, steady. Like I'm crumbling. David shifted. No, Mom, of course not. Just proactive. Making sure you're comfortable, not burdened by all this. He gestured around the room, encompassing her life, her home, her history. Burden. There it was again. Spoken out loud this time. Agnes looked at her hands, still clasped tightly in her lap. She thought of the little card she'd found, the appraisal, the word redevelopment. It wasn't about her safety. It wasn't about her being a burden in their lives. It was about the house, about the space, about the value. When would I need to move? Agnes asked. The question seemed to surprise them. They exchanged a quick glance, relief flickering in their eyes. Oh, no rush, David said, too quickly. Next week, maybe? We've already spoken to the coordinator. Your room is ready whenever you are. Her room, in their lovely community, ready whenever she was. As if her life here, her home, wasn't already ready. As if she was just a package waiting to be shipped. Agnes nodded slowly. She stood up. Her legs felt a little unsteady, but she walked into the kitchen. She put the kettle on. The familiar ritual felt grounding. She came back with 3 cups, placing 2 in front of them, even though they hadn't asked for tea. That sounds thoughtful, Agnes said, her voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside her. Thank you for looking out for me. David visibly relaxed. Bethany uncrossed her arms. See, Mom? We just want you to have peace of mind. They stayed for another 20 minutes, talking about the amenities at Meadowbrook Gardens, showing her glossy brochures she pretended to look at. They hugged her goodbye again, quickly, like they were afraid if they held on too long, she might break. Or maybe they might feel the weight of what they were doing. The moment the door clicked shut, the cheerful facade vanished. The silence in the house rushed in, filling the space they had just vacated. Agnes stood in the living room, looking at the spot where they had sat. Burden. Redevelopment. Her room is ready. She walked over to the armchair and sat down. Her hands were trembling now. They hadn't asked. They had decided. And just like that, her life, as she knew it, was being packed away, like old dishes in a box labeled storage. But beneath the shock and the hurt, something else was stirring. A cold, quiet certainty. They thought they had it all figured out. They thought she would just accept, but as Agnes sat there, alone in her suddenly too quiet house, a new feeling began to take root. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was resolve. A quiet, steely resolve that started with a single thought. We'll see about that. After David and Bethany left, leaving Agnes with the silence and the word burden echoing in her ears, something inside her had solidified. The shock was still there, a dull ache, but the confusion had cleared. They had made their decision. Now she would make hers. The next morning, Agnes started packing. It wasn't a frantic, angry throwing of things into boxes. It was slow, careful work, Like sorting through a lifetime of threads, she started in the spare room, the one that used to be David's bedroom. She didn't have many boxes, just a few old ones from the grocery store, reinforced with packing tape. Each item she picked up seemed to hold a memory. His Little League trophies, dusty on a shelf. She ran a finger over the small metal baseball players. Hours spent at dusty fields, cheering him on. She didn't cry, just a quiet acknowledgement of the time, the effort, the love poured into those years. She wrapped them in newspaper and placed them gently in a box labeled David Childhood. In the closet, she found a small wooden birdhouse he'd made in Cub Scouts. It was lopsided and painted bright, messy blue. She smiled faintly, remembering his intense concentration as he glued the pieces together. This, she kept out. It wasn't going in a box. It was coming with her. It represented a time when his creations, however imperfect, were made with pride and shared with her. She went through photo albums, not the big formal ones, but the smaller, everyday ones. Pictures of picnics, in the park, scraped knees, first days of school. She didn't pack all of them. She chose a select few, maybe 10, that captured moments of pure, uncomplicated joy and connection between her and David. A picture of them laughing on a swing set. One of her teaching him to ride his bike, holding the back of the seat. These she placed in a small, sturdy box she set aside. Her own things were harder in a way. What do you take when your whole life is in a house? Clothes, yes. Books, a few favorites with notes in the margins. Her mother's silver locket, which she always wore on special occasions. It felt like curating the essence of Agnes, deciding which pieces were essential to carry forward. She gave away bags of clothes and household items to a local charity. Let someone else use them, she thought. She only needed what was truly hers, what held the imprint of her own journey, not just her life as a mother in this house. As she packed, the house seemed to change. Rooms became emptier, echoing slightly when she walked through them. Sunlight fell on bare patches of floor where furniture used to sit. The dust motes danced in the air, visible in the quiet stillness. The house felt like it was holding its breath with her, a silent witness to decades of life, now being carefully, methodically disassembled. It wasn't fighting her, it seemed to understand. This goodbye wasn't just hers, it was the house's too, in a way. She didn't tell David or Bethany she was packing. She called the facility herself, confirmed the move-in date, arranged for a car service. It felt important to do this part alone, on her own terms, as much as possible. It was a quiet assertion of the independence they thought she had lost, or perhaps had never fully acknowledged she possessed. On the morning of the move, the car service arrived. She did a final walkthrough of the empty rooms, a lump in her throat, but her eyes dry. She ran a hand over the worn banister of the stairs David used to slide down. She paused by the kitchen window, looking out at the small backyard. Then she took a deep breath, locked the front door, and walked out. She handed the keys to the driver, giving him the address of Meadowbrook Gardens. It felt surreal, like she was a character in a movie, watching herself from a distance. Arriving back at that beige room, it was just as she remembered. The disinfectant smell, the stiff chair, the parking lot view. It wasn't home. But as she unpacked the small box she'd brought with her, placing the wooden birdhouse on the nightstand, arranging her few chosen photos, smoothing her mother's quilt on the stiff bed, she felt a quiet sense of purpose. She had left the house, yes, but she hadn't left herself. She had chosen what pieces of her life, what parts of her story she would carry with her. And in that small, anonymous room, surrounded by the few tangible reminders of who she was, Agnes knew the packing wasn't an ending. It was a preparation, a way to gather her strength, quietly, for whatever came next. Even within these 4 beige walls, she would find a way to be her own person. Life at Meadowbrook Gardens settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. The days were marked by scheduled events: breakfast at 8, bingo on Tuesdays, exercise class in the sunroom, dinner at 5. Agnes went through the motions, She smiled politely at the staff, nodded hello to the other residents, and ate the meals placed in front of her. But mostly she watched. She watched the woman who always sat by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. She watched the cheerful activities coordinator, trying to drum up enthusiasm for a card game. She saw the kindness in some of the nurses' eyes, and the hurried weariness in others. It was a world unto itself, full of people living out their later years, under fluorescent lights and watchful eyes. Agnes felt like a visitor, even though her few belongings sat neatly arranged in her room. She was physically present, but a part of her felt detached, observing this new reality from a distance. She participated just enough not to cause a fuss, not to be seen as difficult. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, something happened that broke the routine. Agnes was sitting in her room, rereading a well-loved book, when there was a soft tap on her door. It wasn't the usual cheerful knock of a staff member. When she opened it, it was one of the quieter aides, a young woman named Maria, who always seemed a bit shy. "Miss Peterson?" Maria said softly, holding out a plain manila envelope. "This came for you." It wasn't through the regular mail. Someone left it at the front desk, asking for it to be given directly to you. Agnes took the envelope, feeling its unexpected weight. There was no return address, just her name handwritten neatly on the front. "Thank you, Maria," she said, her brow furrowing slightly. Maria smiled faintly and left. Agnes closed the door and sat down on the edge of her bed, her heart giving a little flutter of curiosity mixed with apprehension. Who would send her something here? Not David or Bethany. Their communication had been minimal, and certainly wouldn't arrive this way. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several sheets of paper. The first was a printout, a real estate listing for a house in her old neighborhood, complete with photos. Her house wasn't listed, but the street name, Elmwood Avenue, was prominent. The listing talked about the neighborhood's desirability and significant potential for redevelopment. There was also a copy of an appraisal report for a property on her street. The value listed was high, higher than she would have ever guessed. Next, there was a copy of what looked like legal paperwork, a deed transfer document. Her name was on it, listed as the owner, transferring the property to David and Bethany's names, but the signature line for her name was blank, and there were notes scribbled in the margin in a hand she didn't recognize. Legal jargon, but phrases like missing signature, transfer incomplete, legally still titled to original owner. Agnes's hands started to tremble. She reached the last paper. It was a letter, typed, no name or address at the top. It read, "Agnes, you don't know me, but my family lives a few blocks from you on Oak Street. My husband works in real estate development, and he's been approached about properties on Elmwood. Your house came up. We heard through a mutual acquaintance that David and Bethany have been trying to acquire older homes in the area, specifically yours. My husband saw some paperwork recently, something about your property. The transfer was never completed correctly. As of today, the legal title to your house is still fully in your name. They did not finalize the ownership change. You still own your home. You have control. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If you decide you want to sell, do it independently. Find your own agent. You deserve to make your own choices about your property. Please be careful. A friend from the neighborhood." Agnes read the letter once, then again. Her eyes scanned the documents, then back to the letter, the appraisal value, the incomplete deed transfer, the words, legally still titled, to original owner. You still own your home. A strange feeling, unfamiliar yet powerful, began to spread through her chest. It wasn't the cold ache of hurt or the heavy weight of being a burden. It was something sharper, clearer, a surge of adrenaline, of pure, breathtaking clarity. They thought they had quietly, efficiently, removed her from her home, assumed control, perhaps planning to sell it for that high redevelopment value. But they hadn't finished the job. In their haste, their arrogance, they had left the most crucial step undone. She stood up, the papers clutched in her hand, and walked over to the small mirror on the wall. She looked at her reflection. Tired eyes, lines etched around her mouth, gray streaks in her hair. The woman who had felt invisible, discarded, decided for. But as she stared, another emotion began to surface. It wasn't despair, it was possibility. She still owned the house. She still had control over that significant asset. They hadn't just put her here. They had made a mistake, a big one. In that sterile beige room, looking at her own reflection, Agnes Peterson didn't see a forgotten old woman. She saw a woman who had been underestimated, a woman who had just been given a second chance, a critical turning point. The power wasn't all gone. A crucial piece of it, perhaps the most important piece, was still firmly in her hands. She still had the key, not to the nursing home door, but to her own destiny. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she wasn't going to let this chance slip away. Finding that envelope was like a jolt of electricity. It didn't make Agnes angry in a hot, fiery way. Not anymore. It was a cold, clear anger, the kind that settles deep and fuels quiet purpose. They thought they had sidelined her, taken her pieces off the board. But the game wasn't over, not by a long shot. The shift wasn't obvious from the outside. Agnes still ate her meals in the dining room. She still nodded hello to the aides. But inside, a quiet engine had started humming. Her mind, which had been a little foggy with hurt and confusion, felt sharp again. She wasn't just a resident. She was an operative. Her mission, reclaim her life. Her first step was to reach out. She needed help, but not from just anyone. She needed someone she could trust completely, someone who understood the world of deeds and titles. She thought of Martha, her old neighbor. Martha's son, Eli, had become a real estate lawyer, a good one, known for being sharp and honest. Agnes hadn't spoken to him in years. Not since he'd moved away for law school. Finding his number felt like finding a treasure map. She used the phone down the hall, the one everyone shared. She felt a little nervous dialing, but the moment Eli answered, his voice was warm and familiar, like a note from the past. Eli, is that you? It's Agnes Peterson, from Elmwood Avenue, Martha's neighbor. There was a surprised pause, then a genuine warmth in his voice. Agnes, wow, it's good to hear from you. Mom mentioned you'd moved. Are you doing okay? I'm temporarily misplaced, Agnes said, a faint dry smile touching her lips. It felt good to speak that truth out loud to someone. Eli, I have a situation, a complicated one. I need a lawyer I can trust. And I thought of you. She explained everything, slowly, clearly. The conversation with David and Bethany, being brought to Meadowbrook Gardens, finding the anonymous letter, and the incomplete paperwork. She expected him to be shocked, maybe even a little skeptical, but Eli listened intently. You're saying the deed transfer wasn't fully executed? He asked, his tone serious now. That's what the letter implies, and the copy of the document looks like my signature is missing, Agnes said. Okay, Agnes, Eli said. Let's look into this. Can you get me copies of that letter and the documents? Getting the copies required some quiet resourcefulness. The facility had a small computer lab for residents. Agnes, who usually only used it to occasionally email Martha, went down there. She asked the aide on duty, a kind woman named Cheryl, for help scanning some personal papers for her taxes. Cheryl, bless her heart, just smiled and helped Agnes figure out the scanner and email, not asking a single question. Agnes sent the documents to Eli. The next day, Eli called back. His voice was firm. Agnes, you were absolutely right. The transfer was never finalized. You are, without a doubt, the legal owner of that house on Elmwood Avenue. A wave of relief, pure and powerful, washed over Agnes. It was true. And the value, the appraisal I saw. Let's just say, Eli chuckled, a sound of genuine pleasure in his voice. That house, in that location, right now, is worth a considerable amount. David and Bethany were definitely aware of its potential. But potential for you, Agnes, not for them. You can do whatever you want with it, Eli said. No one can stop you. Those words settled deep within Agnes, a new mantra. Eli then connected her with a real estate agent he trusted implicitly, a woman named Valerie McCann. She's sharp, discreet, and she works for you, Eli assured her. Agnes arranged to meet Valerie outside the facility during her scheduled independent time. Residents could leave for appointments or errands, signing in and out. She met Valerie at the local library, a neutral, quiet place. Valerie was exactly as Eli described. Professional, no nonsense, with kind but shrewd eyes. Mr. Jenkins explained the situation, Valerie said, after they'd exchanged pleasantries. What your son and his wife attempted, it's not unheard of, sadly, but leaving the title in your name, that was their mistake. They sat in a quiet corner, surrounded by bookshelves. Valerie laid out the options, explained the market, discussed strategy, selling quietly, by referral only, to avoid drawing attention, keeping Agnes in control of the process. As Valerie spoke, Agnes felt a growing sense of partnership. This wasn't just about selling a house, it was about reclaiming her power. She signed the necessary papers to list the property, her hand steady. We hold the cards now, Agnes, Valerie said, and the "we" felt incredibly good. Agnes also worked with Eli to set up a new bank account, a private one just for her, where the funds from the sale would go. No joint accounts, no shared access. Her money, her future, entirely her own. Back at Meadowbrook Gardens, Agnes went about her days. She attended music therapy. She joined in a game of cards. She chatted with Martha Jenkins on the phone, carefully not mentioning any of her plans, just talking about her day and asking about Martha's roses. To the outside world, she was just Agnes, settling into her new life. But inside she was a whirlwind of quiet activity, a general commanding her troops, moving pieces on a board no one else knew she was playing on. The contrast between her calm exterior and her determined inner purpose felt almost thrilling. She was building something, a future, brick by quiet brick, in the silence they had forced upon her. After Agnes had her talk with Eli and Valerie, setting her plan in motion, a strange thing happened. David and Bethany started trying to contact her more often. It was like her sudden quietness, the lack of her usual polite compliance, had gotten their attention. First, there were calls. David would leave voicemails, sounding a little surprised. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" Then, the messages started to sound a bit more pointed. "Called you. Please call me back." Bethany even sent an email to the facility's general address, asking if Agnes was settling in all right, and if she needed anything, like she was a package that had been delivered and needed checking on. Agnes got the messages. The staff would hand her slips of paper with notes to call David or Bethany. She took the notes, folded them neatly, and tucked them into the pocket of her cardigan. But she didn't call back. This wasn't out of spite, not exactly. It was a choice. For years, she had used her silence to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, to swallow her feelings for the sake of others' comfort. Her silence had been a form of surrender, but now it was different. Her silence was a shield. It was a way to regain control of the conversation they hadn't allowed her to have. It was a space she was creating, a boundary she was drawing. Her silence was becoming her weapon. While they were wondering why she wasn't calling, Agnes was busy, quietly busy. Valerie McCann was working efficiently. Agnes would get calls from Valerie on her designated independent time phone calls. "Agnes, just wanted to let you know, we have 2 serious inquiries already," Valerie reported one afternoon. "Your house is in a desirable spot, especially with the zoning potential. The offers are strong." Agnes listened, a sense of quiet satisfaction spreading through her. They were moving forward. Her house, the one they thought was just waiting for them to decide its fate, was now a valuable asset being handled on her terms. This was happening without David or Bethany having the slightest idea. Agnes started spending some of her quiet time looking at real estate listings online, with Cheryl the aide helping her navigate the website sometimes. Not for big fancy houses, but for smaller places, apartments, maybe a small condo, places by the lake north of the city, or in a lively little town she'd always liked but never had the chance to explore. She imagined sunlight coming through the windows, a small balcony where she could sit, a kitchen that was just her size, a place where every corner, every object, would be there because she chose it, a place of freedom and peace. Envisioning that future felt like planting seeds in fertile ground after a long cold winter. This quiet work, this secret planning, began to change Agnes. It wasn't just internal. She started standing a little straighter. Her gaze was more direct. One morning, getting ready for the day, she looked at her reflection and saw the familiar lines of age. But she also saw a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there for a while. She even rummaged through her small jewelry box and found a simple silver necklace she hadn't worn in months. She clasped it around her neck. Later, before dinner, she put on a touch of her old rose-colored lipstick. Just a little. At lunch that day, Eleanor, another resident who usually kept to herself, leaned over. "Agnes, you seem brighter today," she said, a gentle smile on her face. "Got a sparkle." Agnes smiled back, a real smile this time, not the polite, strained one. "Maybe," she said softly. She was doing it, quietly, relentlessly, like the unseen roots of a plant pushing through hard soil. She wasn't just Agnes, the new resident in room 214. She was Agnes Peterson, owner of a valuable property, planner of her own future, a woman who was reclaiming her worth, one silent, strategic step at a time. The satisfaction wasn't loud, but it was deep and true. Her silence wasn't emptiness, it was power. The days continued to tick by at Meadowbrook Gardens. Agnes kept up her quiet routine. Bingo, a walk in the courtyard when the weather was nice, polite conversation over lukewarm coffee. Meanwhile, in the world outside these walls, Valerie was working. Offers were reviewed. Details were ironed out. Agnes felt a growing sense of momentum, a silent countdown happening just for her. She still received messages from David and Bethany, a mix of attempts at casual chat and thinly veiled concern about why she wasn't calling them back. Agnes filed them away, mentally. Their attempts to reach her now felt less like genuine connection and more like static. Then, one afternoon, as Agnes was sitting in the common area, looking through a magazine, an aide approached her. "Miss Peterson, your son David is here to see you. He's in the lobby." Agnes's heart gave a small, firm beat. She hadn't expected him to just show up. A small part of her felt the old instinct to fuss, to make sure she looked presentable, to wonder if she should rush. But the stronger part, the part that had been quietly planning, felt ready. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and stood up slowly. There was no rush. She was on her own time now. She walked to the lobby. David was standing near the entrance, holding a paper cup of coffee. He was dressed in a crisp shirt, looking professional, but his smile looked a little plastered on. He seemed relieved, and maybe a bit annoyed to see her. "Mom, there you are," he said, stepping forward like he was about to give her a big, warm hug. Agnes met him halfway, allowing a brief, polite embrace, but she didn't hold on tightly. It felt like hugging a stranger wearing her son's face. He gestured to a couple of chairs in a less busy part of the lobby. They sat down, the kind of stiff, uncomfortable chairs designed for short waits, not long conversations. David took a sip of his coffee. "So," he started, trying for a casual tone. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, David," Agnes replied, her voice calm and steady. She folded her hands in her lap, just as she had done the day they brought her here. This time, it was not from shock, but from composure. He waited for her to say more, to fill the silence, to ask about them, about Bethany, about the baby. But Agnes just sat there waiting too. David shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat. "Look, Mom, I was thinking." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping a little. About the house. There it was. The real reason for the unexpected visit. Just some final paperwork, he continued, watching her face carefully. Things we need to clean up. Ownership stuff. Just to avoid any surprises down the road, you know? Agnes tilted her head slightly. He still thought it was his to clean up. He still assumed she was just a passive detail in his plans for her property. The quiet confidence she had built felt solid as a rock beneath her. "Actually, David," Agnes said, keeping her voice level, deliberate, "I've been thinking about the house, too." David's shoulders relaxed a fraction. A flicker of relief, of getting back on familiar ground, crossed his face. "Great. We can go over everything. Maybe look into—" "I've accepted an offer," Agnes said, cutting him off gently but firmly. The words hung in the air, quiet but impactful, like a single chime in a silent room. David froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. His eyes widened slightly. "What?" "I listed it privately," Agnes continued, explaining calmly, like she was discussing the weather. "No signs, no open houses, just conversations, quiet ones, with people who were actually interested in buying." His face was a picture of stunned disbelief. You sold the house?" His voice was flat, stripped of its earlier pretense of casualness. Agnes met his gaze directly. For the first time in a long time, she didn't look away. "I haven't signed the final documents yet. That happens later this week. But yes, David, I am moving forward with the sale. The funds will be wired directly to my own private account." He stared at her, speechless for a moment. I wasn't aware you had listed it," he finally managed to say, the words slow, heavy. "I wasn't aware I needed your permission," Agnes replied, her voice still calm, but with an undeniable edge of finality. David leaned back in the chair, looking visibly rattled. His carefully constructed composure had crumbled. But Bethany and we made plans for that house. We were counting on that space, Mom." Agnes nodded. "Yes," she said softly, the softness more impactful than shouting. "I know. You made space by sending me here. I figured I'd return the favor." The truth landed between them, stark and undeniable. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time in years, and didn't recognize the woman in front of him. The comfortable narrative he had built, where she was a problem to be managed, an asset to be acquired, had just been dismantled before his eyes. "But where will you go?" he asked, quieter now, the confidence completely gone from his voice. Agnes allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "Somewhere with a view," she said. "And a lock on the door that only opens for people who treat me like I belong." He had no argument, no defense, no excuses. In that moment, the power had shifted completely. David Peterson, the successful son with his careful plans, was no longer in control of this narrative. Agnes, the mother he had tried to quietly set aside, was. She had reclaimed her voice, not by raising it in anger, but by using it, calmly and deliberately, to speak her truth and announce her undeniable action. The confrontation wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply true, and the truth, delivered calmly, was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be. David sat there for a few more minutes after Agnes delivered her quiet bombshell. He didn't say much. He looked stunned, like he'd walked into a solid wall he never saw coming. The man who always had a quick answer, a smooth explanation, was speechless. He rubbed his jaw, a habit Agnes remembered from when he was a teenager, trying to figure something out. Finally, he stood up slowly. I should go," he mumbled. "I need to talk to Bethany." Agnes simply nodded. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't apologize for the shock. She just let him stand in the reality of the situation he had created. He walked away, his usual confident stride, replaced by something slower, heavier. He didn't look back as he left the lobby. Agnes watched him go, and as the glass doors swung shut behind him, a profound sense of peace settled over her. It wasn't victory, not in a mean-spirited way. It was liberation. The tight knot in her stomach, the one that had been there for months, the one made of hurt and worry and feeling invisible, finally loosened. She wasn't playing their game anymore. She had taken her ball and gone home, even if home was about to be a brand new place. The lightness she felt was astonishing, like shedding a heavy coat she hadn't realized she was wearing. The next few days were busy, but it was a good kind of busy, the kind where you feel purposeful. Valerie called to confirm the final details. Agnes met her again, this time at Valerie's office, to sign the stack of papers that would make the house sale official. Signing those documents felt different from signing the papers at the nursing home. Those had felt like signing away her life. These felt like signing for her freedom. Each signature was a step out of the past and into a future she was choosing. Valerie smiled warmly as she handed Agnes a final folder. "Congratulations, Agnes," she said. "You handled that with incredible grace. And you got an excellent price, by the way." Later that day, back in her room at Meadowbrook Gardens, Agnes composed her final message to David and Bethany. She didn't call. She didn't write a long, emotional letter. She kept it simple, factual. She typed it on the computer in the resident lab, printed a copy, and placed it in a plain envelope. She asked Cheryl the aide if she could mail a letter for her, a personal matter. Cheryl, ever helpful, took it without a second glance. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It had her name, the address of the house, and the date. Below that, just one sentence. "Please be advised that the sale of the property at your old address was finalized today. Date." She didn't add anything else. No explanation, no apology, no sign-off. Their reactions were immediate and frantic. Her phone, which she kept mostly for calls with Martha, started buzzing with messages. Texts from David. "Mom, what? Is this real? Why didn't you tell us? We need to talk now." Texts from Bethany. "Agnes, this is unbelievable. How could you? David is devastated." There were missed calls, voicemails. Agnes read them, or listened to them, with a calm that surprised even herself. She didn't reply. Let them feel the scramble, the unexpectedness, the loss of control. Let them feel, just for a little while, what she had felt when they so neatly packed her away. She wasn't doing it for revenge, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing they finally understood that she wasn't a chess piece. They could move without consequence. A week later, it was moving day. Not from her house to the nursing home this time, but from the nursing home to her new apartment. Valerie had helped arrange everything. Agnes's few cherished belongings were packed carefully. The wooden birdhouse, the selected photos, her mother's locket, the quilt. The car service took her to a different part of town, to a lovely building overlooking a wide, sparkling lake. As she stepped out of the car and looked up, a sense of rightness settled over her. This wasn't a place someone else had chosen for her convenience. This was a place she had chosen for her own peace and happiness. She walked into her new apartment. It wasn't large, but it was bright and clean, filled with sunlight. The air smelled fresh, not of disinfectant or old paper. The windows opened onto a small balcony, and when she stepped out, the view took her breath away. The lake stretched out before her, wide and blue, shimmering in the afternoon sun. Trees lined the shore, green and full of life. There was a path below, where people walked, and the distant sound of geese calling. She sat down in a comfortable chair near the window, her small box of treasures beside her. She wasn't waiting for anything or anyone. She was simply here, whole, present. She looked out at the vastness of the lake, at the endless horizon. The house on Elmwood Avenue was gone, a closed chapter. The nursing home was behind her, a difficult detour. Her relationship with David and Bethany was uncertain, maybe forever changed. But looking out at that lake, Agnes didn't feel loss or regret. She felt peace, a deep, quiet peace that was entirely her own. She had reclaimed her space, not just physically, but in the world. She had started a new chapter, written entirely by her own hand, on her own terms. and the view was beautiful. Life by the lake was quiet, peaceful. Agnes settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings with coffee on her small balcony, watching the sun sparkle on the water. Afternoons spent reading, or sometimes taking a slow walk along the path by the shore. She decorated her apartment simply, with the things that were most important to her. The wooden birdhouse on a shelf, her favorite photos displayed, her mother's locket resting on her nightstand. This space felt entirely wonderfully hers. A few weeks after the sale was finalized and she had moved, a letter arrived. It wasn't in a business envelope. It was a simple white one, addressed by hand. David's handwriting. Agnes opened it slowly. It wasn't long. He wrote about being shocked, about realizing how much he had misunderstood. He admitted he hadn't seen things clearly, that he had been focused on his own plans, on making space for his new life, and hadn't considered the space he was taking away from her. He wrote that he was sorry, truly sorry. He ended by saying he hoped there might be a way, someday, to make things right. Agnes read the letter several times. She didn't feel a burning need to forgive, or a sudden urge to rush back into his life. But she felt a recognition. He saw it. He finally saw what he had done. It wasn't about winning or losing a house. It was about being seen, about the truth coming to light. She thought of the phrase, poetic justice. It fit. They had tried to erase her, and in doing so, they had erased their own easy access to her life. One calm Sunday morning, just as Agnes was finishing her crossword puzzle and enjoying her second cup of coffee, there was a soft knock at her door. 3 gentle taps, not the firm knock of staff or the hurried rap of someone selling something. It was hesitant. Agnes knew. She didn't rush. She set down her puzzle, took a steadying breath, and walked to the door. When she opened it, David stood there. He looked different than he had in the lobby at the nursing home. The strained, confident mask was gone. He looked younger, in a way, but also tired, humbled. His eyes didn't dart around the apartment behind her. They stayed on her face. And in his arms, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, was a baby. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet. I brought someone I wanted you to meet." Agnes stepped back, opening the door wider. David walked in slowly, hesitantly, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. He didn't comment on the lake view or her new place. His focus was entirely on the small bundle in his arms. He held the baby out gently towards Agnes. "This is Hannah," he said. "She's 5 weeks old." Agnes's heart softened. She looked at the baby, then at David. He wasn't demanding she hold her, or expecting automatic forgiveness. He was offering a connection, a new beginning, centered not on their past hurts, but on this new, innocent life. She reached out and took her granddaughter into her arms. Hannah was warm, so small and fragile. Her little hands were fisted near her face. She smelled sweet, like baby powder and hope. Agnes sat down in her armchair, carefully cradling Hannah, who blinked up at her with blurry, curious eyes. David sat across from her. For a moment, they just sat in comfortable silence, the baby between them. "I got your letter, David," Agnes said softly. He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I didn't know what else to say," he admitted. "Everything I thought felt too late." "It's not about late," Agnes replied, looking at Hannah. "It's about true." "Is it true?" He looked up, his eyes a little shiny. "Yes, Mom, it is." Agnes gently stroked Hannah's cheek. The past was a heavy thing, full of pain and misunderstanding. She wasn't going to pretend it didn't happen. "I'm not angry anymore," Agnes said, her voice low but firm. "But I'm not the same woman who was brought to that place. I won't be anyone's backup plan again." "You shouldn't be," David said quietly. They sat in a silence that was different from the silences before. It wasn't awkward, or strained, or filled with unsaid resentments. It was simply peace, a quiet space where 2 people who had hurt each other deeply could sit, connected by a new life, without having to pretend everything was perfect. After a while, David stood up. "I'll let you rest," he said. taking Hannah gently from Agnes's arms. "Would it be okay if I came by again next week?" Agnes looked at him, at the hope in his tired eyes, at the baby nestled against his shoulder. She thought of the long road they'd taken to get here. "You are welcome to visit, David," she said. "And Hannah is welcome anytime. But you don't get to just step back into my life like nothing happened. You'll need to earn your place in it." He swallowed, nodded, and a real smile, a small fragile one, touched his lips. "I understand," he said. As he reached the door, he paused, looking back. "You were right, Mom," he said. "About the house, about space. I thought I was making room for a new life. I didn't realize I was shrinking yours." Agnes didn't need to answer. She just nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. Then he left. Agnes walked back to the window and looked out at the lake. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in soft colors. She had her peace. She had her independence. And maybe, just maybe, she had the beginning of a different kind of connection with her son. One built on honesty and earned respect, centered around the tiny, innocent life of her granddaughter. The future wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and it was full of possibility. She was here, whole, finally free to live her life on her own terms. Agnes's story is one of quiet strength and reclaiming her life. It reminds us that it's never too late to find your voice and stand up for yourself. If Agnes's journey resonated with you, please let us know in the comments below. Have you ever had to reclaim your space or your voice? Your likes, shares, and comments truly help these stories reach more people who might need to hear them. And if you'd like to hear more powerful stories of resilience and finding strength, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thank you for watching. We hope Agnes's story brings you inspiration and hope.